Welcome to the 700 Club. This week's massive explosion in Beirut is being called Lebanon's 9/11. And as the country deals with the personal tragedy and loss, it's also on the edge of collapse.
Lebanon not only faces an economic crisis, it also suffers under the iron fist of Hezbollah. CBN Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell shows us why the terrorist group is a major factor behind Lebanon's collapse.
Once known as the Switzerland of the East, Lebanon is experiencing its worst economic and societal crisis in modern history.
Hezbollah is using civilian neighborhood to store their weapons. And as a matter of fact, they are firing from civilian neighborhoods. They use the civilian neighborhood as a shield.
That's been documented numerous times, which leads to suspicion after the massive explosion that rocked Beirut.
If this is a Hezbollah warehouse, which I cannot prove now, this will be a very serious allegation against Hezbollah and maybe more political pressure that Hezbollah will end its role as a military power in Lebanon.
The Hezbollah problem is not just limited to the fact that you've got a terrorist organization funded by Iran with a massive arsenal of rockets and precision-guided munitions that face Israel. The problem of Hezbollah is also a financial one.
Jonathan Schanzer of the Foundation for the Defense of Democracy says Hezbollah's infiltration has cratered the Lebanese economy.
This includes money laundering, terror finance, and corruption. And basically, Hezbollah has corrupted and corroded what was once a vibrant banking center. It has now eaten it alive. And there is indications that the banking sector is on the verge of collapse.
Religious loyalties and corruption also play a part.
You can't blame it entirely on Hezbollah. Again, some of this is good old-fashioned greed.
And even before COVID-19, Lebanese protesters filled the streets, railing against their leadership and the failing economy. Now, more protesters are turning on Hezbollah.
Our message is heard. The French and the Americans are receptive. They have promised us to work on implementing the UN Security Council Resolution 1559, which calls for the removal of all illegal weapons from Lebanese and non-Lebanese militias, especially Hezbollah, that has hijacked the Lebanese state.
Our message is that we respect the Lebanese constitution and its implementation and the implementation of Resolution 1559, and that Iran does not dominate Lebanon.
Schanzer says the opportunity for Lebanon's people to drive out Hezbollah will be when the economy collapses. The aftermath of this massive explosion could become the time to act. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, let's hope that it becomes the time to act. Let's hope that there's a political future for Lebanon. There's a long history here. It goes back to 1972. And before that time, Lebanon was known as the jewel of the Mediterranean. It was a place where Christians and Muslims and Jews and all religions could come together. They had shared government. They had a wonderful parliament. They were economically prosperous, one of the wealthiest countries on the Mediterranean. But it all went away because in their pride, if you will, that here in Lebanon we all get along, they extended an invitation to the PLO. And this was in 1972 when the PLO tried to overthrow the king of Jordan. And so in response, Jordan threw them out. And Lebanon provided a place for them, refugee camps, not knowing what they were inviting into their midst. They opened their borders and they invited in radicals who then proceeded to overthrow the government and a Lebanon civil war with armed militias on both sides. This is the reality of Lebanon today, but it goes back that far. Now, if you're an armed militia, you need money. And so Hezbollah turned to Iran, and Iran is now viewing Lebanon as some kind of satellite state. And they're fully radicalized, and they're bent on the destruction of Israel. So they've Southern Lebanon is now a military base with dug-in bunkers. So what's it going to take to uproot that? And how is that going to happen? In any kind of economic collapse, it's always the most organized who come out on top, and we've seen that again and again in the history. Are the people of Lebanon willing to sacrifice what's necessary to get organized, to get these terror groups out? I don't know. We've got to look, and we've got to hope, and we've got to see. But I remember it. I was in Lebanon in 1969, and Beirut was absolutely beautiful. And people were at peace, and the prosperity was there. So let's pray that this can come to be. Let's pray this can come to pass. Well, here at home, some good news today on the economy, as the unemployment rate is down once again. John Jessup has more from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
That is right, Gordon. The unemployment rate fell in July by a bigger drop than economists had expected. The jobless rate down to 10.2% as the economy added nearly 1.8 million jobs. That also beat analysts' forecasts. And there's some good news on the coronavirus as well. Although the death toll is now over 160,000, the number of new cases dropped by more than 12% this week, and the number of deaths also fell. The latest reports coincide with the debate over whether schools should reopen, as many families weigh the best option from public to private to homeschooling, and the newest trend, learning pods. Heather Sells has the story.
This fall, public schools may see an exodus like never before. That's because many districts are going online, including 11 of the 15 largest systems in the country. Decisions like that aren't sitting well, with a growing number of families choosing to homeschool.
We have seen an explosion in the homeschool community nationally, to the point that many districts are finding that their superintendents' offices are being flooded and their systems shutting down by how many families are withdrawing from public education this fall.
Membership at the Homeschool Legal Defense Fund has tripled, and California's Homeschool Association is seeing that same increase in the number of parents seeking information. It's not that all these parents want to teach their kids. Some just need help as they try to balance their work and public school distance learning. Other parents are flocking to private schools.
We are increasingly seeing reports from around the country of private schools seeing upticks in their enrollment, and specifically a parent saying they want the in-person 5-day-a-week education that they think is best for their kids.
And the latest trend is pods or micro schools, which appeal to parents worried about COVID safety.
Families of maybe in total 10 kids or so are getting together, and they're sort of pooling their resources to bring a teacher on to teach those kids in person, but they're sort of self-contained groups, so that decreases the danger of COVID-19 exposure.
Perhaps the least affected in this sea change are homeschool families who can continue mostly as normal. Still, they're finding that parents new to teaching or supervising their kids' education want help. Education coach Candace Duggar says parents need to know their state laws to homeschool and get organized.
You're going to still need a schedule. You're still going to have a problem. You might not be learning and worried about finding your shoes and your lunch boxes and your backpacks in the morning, but you'll be switching those problems out for where's my computer, where's my charger, I can't find my headphones.
One silver lining for these parents, plenty of time to explore their kids' passions, what they love to learn. It's a setup for lifelong learning, something that everyone can buy into. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Thanks, Heather. And you can find more resources on homeschooling and educational options by visiting our website, cbnnews.com. Well, New York's Attorney General is trying to wipe out the National Rifle Association, accusing the NRA of seriously mismanaging funds and suing to dissolve the gun rights group. The NRA filed a countersuit saying she's going after them for political reasons. NRA supporters call the timing of the Attorney General's action very suspicious, coming so close to a presidential election where the gun rights battle could be bigger than ever. Paul Strand has that story.
Just a few minutes ago, my office filed a lawsuit against the National Rifle Association to dissolve the organization in its entirety.
New York AG Letitia James came out firing, charging the NRA with serious mismanagement that wasted and misspent tens of millions of donors' dollars.
For personal use by senior leadership, to award contracts to the financial gain of close associates and family.
This isn't the first time James has personally gone after the gun rights group.
She essentially questioned the tax status of the NRA, said that they claim to be a charity group, but they're actually a quote, terrorist group. So obviously there's certainly a lot of history involved there.
John Lott, author of Gun Control Myths, calls it politically motivated.
It's just a real abuse of power for an attorney general to single out somebody to go after a nonprofit because she disagrees with them politically.
Gutowski points out the timing could be designed to sabotage the NRA's plan to spend tens of millions of dollars on the 2020 election.
During the press conference, the AG was asked whether she would try to freeze their assets, and she said yes. So if she's able to do that, I mean, clearly they won't be able to spend those millions of dollars.
And it's such a crucial time for the issue. Lott believes the political parties are so split on gun control that gun owners will realize their Second Amendment rights may seriously be on the line.
I think this election will determine the long-run future for whether or not people are able to privately own guns to protect themselves and their families.
All this comes as gun sales are soaring to record levels, with a public panicked over the pandemic, riots, looting, and efforts to defund the police. It's causing 1,000 people a day to join the NRA over the last 2 months. Paul Strand, CBN News, Washington.
Thanks, Paul. Gordon, this is unprecedented legal action.
It's not entirely unprecedented. Some prosecutors in Texas went after a House of Representatives majority leader and managed to get a conviction before a circuit court, federal circuit court, overturned it. But in the aftermath of all that litigation, he's out of power. He ultimately won the legal case, but they were effective in removing a political voice. And so that's exactly what the Attorney General of New York is doing. This is politics, and it's hardcore politics. It's weaponizing law enforcement in order to take out a political opponent. That is what is going on. And they're using the excuse of what leadership did, and I'm not in defense at all of what they did. I applaud Oliver North for bringing it to light. But that is something that the NRA has to deal with internally. If law enforcement wants to go after that leadership for their actions, okay. But to take on the entire NRA and say we're going to dissolve it and we're going to freeze their assets and their funds because of mistakes on the part of leadership, that's a reach too far. And the intent, and it's a very clear intent, is let's tie up all their assets so they're on the sidelines in the 2020 election. This is incredible to me. This is not an America I want to live in. I don't understand why there isn't an outrage over this, but there needs to be. My hope is that it actually causes a backlash, and it causes people to really wake up and realize your civil liberties are at risk here. If they're successful in shutting down the NRA, labeling it as a terrorist group, seizing all their assets and freezing them and putting them on the sidelines during an election cycle, well, then guess what? They're going to come after everyone they disagree with. And they're going to try to use the same tactics. For law enforcement, there are all kinds of weapons they have that were all passed to stop organized crime or drug trafficking or these other things. Those same statutes can be used against anybody.